Woo, the Golden Stallion, the man of tomorrow, Savzu, the rated R radio star, here, Dr. Brian Sovryn, here, with a very special real-time Sovryn, one that I am very excited to do, and one that I think will be one of many. Might not be 7 of 9, but, we can't win them all. but, uh, but one of many, and that is I am being joined by none other than Sek McGora of the Agora podcast. Definitely one of the finer minds in the world, in my opinion, and easily one of the finest friends anyone could have. So just a dynamite person, and had a great conversation with him. Though Zoom was not playing nicely with us on the day that we recorded this, and so I just want to let you know ahead of time that with this recording, if it feels a bit choppy or if things kind of jump around at points, it's been edited. Okay, I usually don't edit, but in this case, I did edit it. It's been edited to where, it all comes together, because there's so many points where, whether it's my side or his side or whatever, that, our connection would drop and we'd have to reconnect. And anyway, it's how it goes. But it was such a dynamite conversation, and Sek lays so many, just massive drops of truth that, I want to make sure this gets out there. And, we do hint at that we're going to do at least a part 2 on this conversation, and we will certainly be doing that, and hopefully with better connectivity, but we'll deal with that as it comes. So without further ado, we'll get right into it, and I'll let this conversation just ride itself out, and I'll see all of you on the other side. Power on.
Real-time Sovryn is go.
Well, that's fine. Looks like we have an AI companion here too. I don't know what the hell that is.
That's the feds.
Yeah, of course. Well, it's not a party without them. I mean,
Yeah.
You're doing it wrong if they don't show up.
There's a reason my podcast has so many listens. You know what I mean? Them and apparently Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, you know what? Let's just roll right into it, brother. Let's just do this. So, welcome everybody to a real-time Sovryn, where we get 20,000 downloads an episode, and it's because they're taking notes.
19,000 of them are feds.
The other 1,000
numbers are numbers. You know what I mean?
No, I know. No, a win's a win. I mean, for sure. And I'm sure the other 1,000 are hardened criminals, but that's fine. I'll take that audience.
We're in good company. Yeah,
that's right. Not claiming I know anything about that, but anyway. So for those that are viewing or listening, and this is actually the first time I'm doing a real-time Sovryn using Zoom, so we will see exactly how this turns out. It could fail in spectacular fashion, but at least if I'm going to fail, I am not alone, and I am being joined by a longtime cohort at this point, that being Sek McGora, who is infamous for the Agora podcast. Sek, welcome aboard, my man.
Hey, man, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be one of your first guests. This is awesome.
Yeah,
congrats on all you're doing here, man. Like, you've been doing all sorts of crazy new shows, and I'm really liking it. I like what you're doing. So.
No, appreciate it, brother. Yeah, you're number 2, and there's no insinuation in that. But you're the second guest I've ever had on it, so which works out great in my opinion.
I'll take it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, with real-time Sovryn, I like to keep things kind of fast and loose. And I appreciate what you said about trying to get everything out there. We're certainly I'm trying to ramp up as much as I can. And I think what we're going to get here is actually a very first in talking about talking about a previous real-time Sovryn. I don't know that that's exactly happened. Maybe I did that once where I responded to some questions, but in general, we're actually going to reference a previous episode, which actually had the first guest ever on real-time Sovryn, that being, of course, my absolutely luscious and illustrious wife, Ellen Sovryn. And in that episode, we were actually talking about, the title of the episode was something to the effect of, should you actually tear down the government? Should you actually shut it down? Should you stop it? And kind of my premise within that was, like expending your energy trying to put an end to government is not only a waste of time, but actually potentially harmful to many, 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 many people. Not just harmful, potentially very lethal, because you would be creating vacuums in power that I don't think most people even know really exist. And maybe by design, we're not supposed to know that they exist, but regardless, that is what would happen. And so the premise that I laid out, or the solution I should say that I laid out, is a very old one, including in libertarian and anarchist circles, that really the only thing you can do, the only thing that's worth your energy, worth your time, is to just build the alternative system. I don't even like the word system, but we'll run with it. Build the alternative system. Um, instead of trying to tear down the one that exists, just build its replacement, um, or at least on a smaller scale, perhaps. So you had some thoughts on this, Sek, and I know you listened to the episode, and you talked about building a new world, actually in the Discord channel for Sovryn Tech patrons. And I wanted to get into this. I wanted to talk about this with you because, and the reason why is I feel like you're one of the people that is doing exactly what was discussed. I mean, you are like building your literal, like almost your own alternative world, um, where you're at, and you're somebody with the knowledge and the means, to make that happen. Um, I mean, what were your thoughts on that conversation, on all of that, and then kind of, maybe you can get into what you were doing or what you're doing.
Well, thanks. I appreciate the kind words, and that was a great conversation between yourself and Ellen. I couldn't agree more with what you guys were saying.
Right on.
And your boy Bucky Fuller there. There's the old quote.
Yeah.
You don't create a new reality by fighting against the existing model. You build a new model that makes the old obsolete. And I think that's true for, at least from in my opinion, both on a tactical and strategic level, but this is also true on what you might call like a psychic level. I don't mean in the sense that I have some sort of form of ESP, but I mean just for your own mental health, so to speak. And I apologize if this is a rough example for some, but like my father is a very abusive person, right? And for a long time I hated the man, right? And I'm using this example because this is going to point to what I'm getting at. And I just hated the man, and after a long time it started to occur to me that I was spending a lot of time and focus and energy hating someone. And there's the old quote where the best revenge is to live your life well. And it occurred to me that it would be actually far better for my own well-being if I just completely dropped, I wouldn't say forgive, but dropped the hate that I had for another person and just focused on my own well-being. And I think this is a sort of a microcosm for the way I think about the state or any sort of other, violent or dominant systems. Uh, so going back to what I said, tactically and strategically, if you think of it in terms of warfare, for kind of an example, if we're at war with this system, it doesn't help us at all to fight against it on its own terms. So we're never, what the state does is create violence and tears down other alternatives. So it's not going to do us any good to fight what you might call a superior enemy according to its own strengths. So plus you're just going, most of us would just get crushed under the wheels. A lot of people would get hurt, or in jail or killed. And so even just from a strategic or practical standpoint,
Yeah, you're not going
lots
to
of
have the
people have
success with
tried.
that. I mean, I want to jump in just a little bit on this. I mean, that's the thing is, like if it was warfare, I mean, talk about being outgunned. Like it's not even it's not even close, especially when you consider the use of drones and all these other things. Um, You
I
know,
mean,
I
one
go
might
ahead.
bring up the point like, okay, well, what about the Vietnamese? And
Nah.
sure, or the Afghani,
Hmm.
a bunch
Hmm.
of goat herders with AK-47s, held up against the world's largest military, and that's true. But what happened along the way is like, I don't know, several million, I think it was tens of million Vietnamese died
Right.
in that campaign.
Right.
And I mean, God knows how many Afghanis and Pakistanis died in those wars, lived in fear for decades and decades, under drone wars. So, and at the end of the day, they just had a bigger and better or local warlord. You know what I mean? So
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't think you can achieve anarchist ends by these means. You
Right.
might be able to repel a larger military force, but you're not going to achieve like any kind of liberation this way. And even violent, I would say, even violent revolution usually ends up having, it's a meet the new boss, same as the old boss kind of a situation where
Yeah.
being able to rally the amount of violent and brutal force necessary for a revolution just creates the framework to recreate the old system.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I want to. I like what we're talking about here because, and I like your pushback on that. Bringing up, the Vietnam War, bringing up the Afghan War. I mean, the one thing I would say to that as well is, and I want to get back to, like our previous points, but the one thing I would kind of like, also bat back at that is essentially it just sent the U.S. home. It didn't actually necessarily defeat the U.S.,
Correct.
as to where if this was some kind of like homegrown anarchist revolution of some kind, and maybe that even just saying that will get me kicked off of YouTube, but that's fine. There's alternatives. Uh, but if it's that, um, I you're not sending anybody packing. Like it's a literal zero sum game if you're thinking that way. And I think the results would be the exact opposite and may even end with the use of weapons that have the big N on them. And so yeah, I mean, I get it, and I think it's a fair point to bring up. At the same time, I think the results would be very different if it was, on, shall we say, domestic shores. So
Yeah, I would kind of agree with that. And even if
sure.
you're successful, if you do kind of a cost benefit analysis, it's like you're going to spend a lot of lives, a lot of resources, and a lot of
Hmm.
firepower for a maybe. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So
Right.
so yeah, you're going into a maybe, and meanwhile, you could be just building your own reality, your own networks, and your own infrastructure, like in your own life, and this has immediate benefits um, to you or to me right now in the here and now. That doesn't require any sort of lofty sacrificial sacrificial goals or some dream of a utopia someday. It doesn't require any of these things. It doesn't require tearing down these sort of systems, and it benefits me right now, and hopefully builds the future I want to see. And there's something to be said with for like I don't know how to articulate this well, and my best example is talking about like my abusive relationship with my father. But when your focus or method is tearing down what exists, in some sense you're still like you're defining yourself by your relationship to that thing.
Yes.
So instead of defining yourself by what you want to see by doing it and putting it into practice, you're defining yourself by what what you're against, or your desire for destruction. And it's kind of in some sense you bring back what you put out, and
Right.
that's never served me well, I guess we'll say.
Yeah, I mean, it's the old saying, the first rule of the fanatic, you become the enemy when you become so obsessed with them.
Yes.
And I think that's very true. And in some ways, I would argue I've even seen it. One of the big, in my opinion, I've always felt that libertarianism or like anarcho-capitalism or things like this, that had a moment in the sun. I want to say from like 2010, or maybe if I'm going to be generous, from like 2008 to 2015. And I think when, the whole Trump situation happened, that's basically when the fanatics became so obsessed that they became the enemy, because so many libertarians just instantly turned. Suddenly they're like, "Oh yeah, no, no, yep, I'm voting for Trump. I'm voting." Like, wait, what? You're voting? We don't vote. But no, then suddenly they said they were. Um, so I think that that first rule of the fanatic, ironically, does occur within people who espouse, or who claim to espouse, the idea of self-liberation, personal liberty, and all of that.
Yeah, it's sort of a race to the bottom in a sense. You know, you want so badly to see results that you just give up. You almost give away the part of yourself, the reason why you started doing these things in the first place.
Right.
And I don't think that's true of every person that sort of lived through that time.
Sure.
I think a lot of them just walked away, and the ones
Yep.
you're seeing are the ones that are left.
Yeah.
Um,
100%.
yeah, I think that's very true. Because I was one of those people. And
Sure.
yeah, it's sort of a race to the bottom when you want it so badly and you're willing to do anything for it. Um, you're going to eventually become the thing that you hate, like we said before. And it's some of this is a long game too, and I don't think a lot of people want to see, liberty in our lifetime and all this sorts of things. And I don't think the state is going to disappear even in our lifetimes. So
Right.
all the more reason to build the world around you that you want to see, and that's where you have the most influence anyway. Um, I know you're not necessarily a fan of the Stoics, but I think the concept of like spheres of influence has been important to me,
Hmm.
like understanding where I have the most control, and that's in my immediate circle. The
Right.
world that exists around me day to day. I have little to no effect on what Washington does. Um, so it's uninterested. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in building my own reality.
No, I'm with you on that. So, building your own reality. Like I said earlier, I think, Sek, you're one of the people I know that's like actually doing that. I mean, do you want to talk about, because I think some people would, we can say these things all the time, and certainly we've had, you've even brought up legendary figures, and somewhat, I'm always careful with the word hero, but I'll say heroes of mine like Buckminster Fuller, have talked about it in the past. Um, but I mean, what can people do to actually like build this world around them? In opposition, it's not, you know, to even say it's in opposition, is, so much language we have to be careful with, because then you're like, you're doing this to oppose them. No, you're doing this to make yourself happy. So it's not exactly in opposition. But anyway, what are you doing to create the world around you? What are recommendations, like even simple ones, you could make to people about it?
Well, I think you said it. What makes you happy?
Ah,
So it's hard to say. And you and Ellen touched on this, where there is no one size fits all solution. There never was, there never
right.
will be. The solution is always going to be very individual and pluralistic. So I can speak what I do, because these are the things that I'm interested in, I'm good at, and I want to see, and they make me happy. But for another individual, it might be something else. What are you good at? What are you interested in? And on a broad stroke, it would be to just sort of decouple or insulate yourself and the people around you, and then further into your community, local community. Um, to decouple yourself from systems of domination or things based on violence, either directly or indirectly. And honestly, try to be fucking kind to each other. Like
Right.
that's been my thing a lot of the time. Is it's not something that gets touched on even in anarchist circles much, but the state is a very cruel and violent organization. It's the, in some sense, the realm of domination and cruelty. And a little bit of kindness to your fellow people around you goes a long way, and just trying to understand like where people are coming from. I think that's always a positive thing, and not just for like some sort of moral higher virtue or something like that, but just because it has immediate practical effects. Like if you're kind to other people, people are generally kind to you, and the the circle around you is just much better and makes for a more happier life, at least for me. So uh that there's that. But ask yourself, what are you good at? What can you do to either provide for yourself economically, that it sort of removes your support for the state and builds something uh new. I'm very interested in the concept by Carl Hess of community technology, which is uh reimagining production to and production to so that it is more responsive to the local needs of the people involved, and it gives more control to the people involved. So what can you produce
Right.
yourself or in your local community? What can you do? um, you know Make friends with your neighbors, or people in your local community, or join some sort of maker space. I mean, are you into computers or bicycles? What are you into? And what is your passion or whatever? And go try to do that, and build sort of a community and infrastructure around you, that makes you happy and betters yourself and those in your community. And that's a big step in the right direction. And it doesn't have to be, you know, um, see, that's again the problem with these big plans and these big universals, is people will wait for like the one big thing that'll change their entire life, or change the world or change society. And you're gonna wait your whole life for that.
Yeah.
It's you gotta just make little small, I mean, grow a fucking tomato. You know what I mean? Like just small steps in the
Yeah.
direction that you want to see things go. And that's it. That's all that's all there is really to it. For me, I'm a greenie. I like the nature and the outdoors, and I like things that grow. It's that my favorite scene in Lord of the Rings, where it's like that man, he no longer cares for living things. He's got his mind is made of gears and metal. And I'm one that I'm the ants, man. I still care for the living things and things that grow. So my focus is, on food production and local, yeah, both individual food production, local food production, sort of what you might call rewilding and guerrilla
Hmm.
gardening. And I try to produce things myself on a very low tech in a very low tech way. And
Yeah.
I try to reuse and repurpose things and scavenge. So I think that I hopefully am having some effect on environmental issues that are concerning to me, and a fucking giant garbage island in the ocean. So I try to reuse those things, and it also saves me money, and it keeps my brain working. And I try to remake new uses for old things. And that's just the things that I'm interested. I make my own dirt. You know what I mean? Like like just, I get into like worm compost, just all of
Yeah.
those sorts of things. Those are my jam. But I also just really like doing those things. Like I would do those things if I didn't have some sort of strategic goal for them anyway. So
Right.
it benefits me and makes me happy now. And also, my kids get to see where their food comes from, and that makes me happy.
Well, they
Um,
get an amazing education with that. The one that
yes,
matters too. Yes.
yes. They can see
Yeah.
what it takes and what the earth sort of provides. And some of my my young, my little daughter's first bits of food were green beans straight out of the garden, just fistfuls of green beans, just like stuffing them
Phenomenal.
in her face. And that's just a beautiful moment. So like
Yeah.
even if I didn't have some alternative goal, I would do this anyway. You know what I mean? So
Yeah. Yeah. I think you raise a great point here because, I mean, with a lot of what you're saying, because, like you mentioned earlier, and, I remember when President Obama like said this, admitted this and said it explicitly, government is the monopoly use on force.
yes.
And I think government also I mean, well, probably forever, but certainly in the last, shall we say, 5 years or so, or 4 years to be more specific, government also wants to be the monopoly on health and the monopoly, I think, on food. Um, and there's varying, we could get into entire side tangents around a lot of that. Um, and I think those are in some ways, like great places to start to build your own world is to take control of, your own food sources and, your own sources, shall we say, of health or, your own health in general. Because when you can, I think when you can start to, harness both of those for yourself and somewhat by yourself or with a smaller community, you find just how little you really need a lot of what government seems to be offering you. Um,
So
and
both of our
go ahead.
wives are, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you,
No,
but
no, please.
both of our better halves are chemists, right? So
Yes,
my, I should have mentioned this. We're super into plant medicine over here. So
right on. Yes,
my wife is a chemist, as is yours, and she repeatedly says that the compounds that they've used in these medicines, they've just synthesized from plants that mostly grow wild. You know what I mean?
right.
Like they're compounds that exist in plants that are probably in your backyard yard that you might be spraying with glyphosate at this moment, you know? And so a lot of this you're absolutely right that a lot of this medicine sort of ends, just keeping yourself healthy with a good, diet and good food, sort of eliminates a lot of the medical or the pharmaceutical industry. And just learning a little bit can go a long way. And it's not wacky voodoo. Like I said, the a lot of these compounds that exist inside of these like usually wild plants that grow, a lot of them grow in many different climates too. And it the what the pharmaceutical companies have done, and not for every, the pharmaceutical companies have also created like medicines that we probably couldn't create at home. But for a lot of what they've done is they've synthesized the compounds that exist in these plants in a slightly different way or slightly different molecules so that they can patent them. And
Right.
so they've taken these things that grow wild that you yourself can go out in the woods and find, and they've patented them so they can turn them into a commodity and sell them back to you. So that's another, you're absolutely right. It's another great way to sort of take charge of your own, health, and, fitness and diet also come into this as well. And fucking
Yeah, I
sunshine.
mean, right. Yeah, getting sunshine, exactly, which we all seem to be trapped in offices, or at least many of us do.
Not
Fortunately,
I,
guys
sir.
like you, Sek, are out there. You are in nature's office, man,
Yeah, for real.
which
Hey,
is
let me
great.
run something by you that you touched
Please.
on. So something I've been saying for a long time, and so I don't think the government itself is the state.
Hmm,
Okay, so the state is a monopoly on the legitimate use of violence and law within a geographic location, correct?
right.
So so the government is essentially what I would call the enforcement mechanism of the state.
Hmm,
But you cannot maintain a monopoly on violence and law by brute force alone. So, like, regimes usually don't last long if they
right.
rely on solely on brute force. So, in some sense, that's what the government is. It's the violent arm of the state. It's the one that exerts force.
Hmm.
So, what I would call the state would include the government, but it is not just the government. I would also include
Aha.
things like corporations, financial institutions, media. Uh, I mean, pharmaceutical and health companies are corporations, so I would include those as well. Think tanks, even I would say. All of these things this is why the government isn't interested in, like, let's say, shoe production, because it doesn't really matter. If
Yeah.
that would, eh, uh that would not give them any extra ability to control populations. But it is very involved in very specific industries and have a very cozy relationship with, like you said, food production, health, water, uh, communications, certain kinds of high technology, and the financial system. So all of these things, I think, combined with the government, that is the state. The government is and this is sort of not dissimilar from what you might like a Marxist class theory, where the government is essentially enforcing the will of like big business and corporations. So I just rambled a bit, but I would widen the category of the state to include the following what I said before, financial institutions, corporations, media, education, think tanks, and the health system. All of these things are required, I think, to maintain a monopoly on force and violence. And I think if you look throughout history, you'll see this repeat itself over and over again. There's a reason Rome built aqueducts and
Right.
controlled, and this is the reason the early states controlled food production and the priest class. You know what I mean?
Yes, you just hit it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So you'll see
Y-
this right now. It's corporations, but in previous incarnations of the state, it was kings and priest class, or this in Soviet Russia, it was governments and bureaucracy and the Politburos. But so the what fills that those spaces differs
mhm.
over time and space, but right now it's corporations and the like.
Yeah. No, oh boy. Look, I love what you're saying. I agree. And I love that differentiation and that precision in terms. Because the concept of the corporation especially is in American history, like that wasn't always something that wasn't part of the program, right? Wasn't a part of the original Constitution. Not that I give a shit about the original Constitution. I totally agree with George W. Bush that it's just a goddamn piece of paper. Like, and I'll wipe my ass with it anytime. But so when the concept of the corporation, ended up becoming a thing, this idea of corporate personhood within all this, um, I think an interesting thing kind of occurred, um, in that America itself, separated, like the concept of the separation of church and state, right? Now that's something that is very, I guess I would argue, very fundamental. Um, and it's not something that anybody's really had to fight over because most people basically just get along here. It's not like Ireland and Northern Ireland, we're not talking about the IRA and all of that business. Um,
Up the
where, yeah, right. Woo. uh, uh, um, so, you know, religion isn't so much the problem here, but religion, there's the old saying, war is the health of the state. Religion is also actually a major part of the health of the state. And the reason that it was is that religion very much handled the role that right now I would argue that the pharmaceutical industry, the technology, as in, like the tech giants, Google, Apple, all of them, these roles that these businesses have kind of like filled in, the idea of, even just like connection, the communication endpoint, the health industry, which before, what did you do? You prayed to God pretty much, please heal me from whatever this is. But now you're looking to Pfizer or something, Um, and so it's interesting because I think if there was any actual sense of freedom, and not that there really was, but if there was any actual sense of freedom in the geographic area known as the United States of America, it was because we were actually free. Not It's not that we had freedom of religion, okay, or it's not that America had freedom of religion, it's that it had freedom from religion. But the state knew it couldn't keep existing with that kind of power vacuum. It needed something that could fulfill the laity. So basically, like, government hasn't taken it, because I know this is a common refrain or a common comment by libertarians and others, that Basically, the state has, or the government has become the religion of the people. Um, I think it's actually more that a lot of, shall we say, Western medicine um, and technology, a lot of the high tech stuff has actually taken the place of religion, for people. And what I love about you saying that these things they all actually make up the state. The state isn't just the government. Um, yeah, it's very much creating a very real system of control. I mean, another comment I had made in that episode with Ellen was, this business owner who said, I'm not afraid of the government. I'm afraid of Google. The government can just find me. Google can destroy me. And that really hits at the point that Google is absolutely a part of the state. Every tech giant is a part of the state. It's not the government, but it is part of the state. And it's interesting that, I mean, and that makes so much sense because, like, right now, there's a massive antitrust case going against Google. And it's really like these different organizations within the state kind of fighting within itself, seeing who can have the most power within this structure that is the state. So I think your reframing of that concept is absolutely brilliant. Like that's a great way to understand how these things work, because you can't say that they're separate. Like they're all part of the same Leviathan. They're all part of the same monster. Just they're different arms and different legs and whatever else. What do you got?
Not to toot my own horn, but I
Please.
think like this is necessary for understanding the way things actually are so that we can move forward. Like you said about Google, I don't see a differentiation between Google and the state. I mean,
Right.
never mind that the Google start was started up with the CIA seed money.
Yep.
I mean, never mind that it's like literally a corporation itself is a state created legal fiction. Um, you know, all of these things, I would say I've been calling Google essentially a field office of the State Department for a long time.
Yep.
And I would say that Amazon is is a field office for the CIA. So there is no real differentiation between if we view all of these uh, organizations as one super organization, I think we're because we have a better understanding of what is. Of this is not necessarily original to me. I'm building off of a lot of other folks. I think that Konkin was starting with this, and I think even this is entirely in line with the Marxist sort of class analysis of you know the material base and the superstructure.
Sure.
All these things have the goal of population control, and government is just one aspect of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's very much a techno religion, and I mean, bringing up like a lot of the tech giants. I mean, you can just see like the relationship that a lot of people have with these groups is very much, treating them like the priesthood or even treating them like God. Um, and I mean, I think there's so many mental fictions that build up with the way that a lot of this technology works. Um, Oh man, I mean, I think it's a conversation that we would need to part two on. We would need to do a part two on as far as
Yes.
yeah, as far as like the relationship with tech, um, because I know you, and maybe this can be a bit of a teaser for the next time we get together on Real Time Sovereign, because I know you, and you're very much a I don't want to say anti-tech. I mean, do you want to describe yourself quick and your position on that?
Man, I go back and forth in my own head on that all the
Sure.
time. I'm very tech skeptical, and I'm not sure to what degree uh, a lot of what we would call modernity is the result of a sort of technological advancement, and how much of the problems that we have are inherent to technological progress. I know I
Hmm.
keep bringing up Jacques Ellul. He's a Christian anarchist from the earlier 20th century. Uh, he doesn't make like a moral case against tech, but he would say that this is not necessarily the result of the state or capitalism or anything. That this is actually the result of the recreation of technique is how he would describe this. So this would include technology, but also methods of efficiency, or using the end goal of efficiency recreates the system, and it grows exponentially. And so, regardless of sort of what economic or overarching domination structures you have, technology would recreate the system every time. Um, and this is true in some sense because, weirdly, so the Soviet Union was possibly the most industrialized society in modern history. Like,
Sure.
they were entirely focused on industrial production. That was
Yeah.
the focus of their entire society. So it's not a problem with, I mean, capitalism has its own problems and it might exacerbate the problem, but the origin of the problem might not be capitalism itself. It might be technology. And I think it obviously has a lot of problems. And I think overall, I would tend to think that it has a net negative on society, especially things that we would call like high technology or digital technology. And you're right, it is sort of like its own weird religion, and it has taken the role of the priest class. I mean, can you imagine the kings and the priests of old times? Can you, what like not even in their wettest dreams could they achieve the amount of control that
Right.
these people have over our lives now. Um, they people think of kings as like these all powerful monarchs or whatnot, but and lots of people have made the argument otherwise. From I'm not a huge Hoppe fan, but he's made the argument. But also, Michel Foucault has made this argument many times. It's like oftentimes they had little to no interest in the daily lives of their subjects
Right.
because, for one, it didn't matter to them because you had no power anyway. So what do they care as long as you're not revolting? So
Hmm.
they didn't care if you were, drinking or smoking or doing drugs or whatever, or what kind of who you were fucking. They didn't care about any of those things. And they, even if they did, they didn't have the resources or technological advancement to be able to exert sovereignty over those things like you have in what you might call the modern nation state.
Right.
Um, but now we have this sort of democratic total state where people have like a vested interest in the behavior of what other people are doing, because we're all under the same demos. We, in some very real way, what other people are doing actually affects us through this other entity, which we call like the nation state. So like now people have the incentive and also the means through technology to be really concerned and to modify the behavior of others,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
which is horrifying.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think there a lot of our, quote unquote high technology, um, has dramatically changed the way that people think, uh, in general about all kinds of things, like in ways that I'd love to explore, and I'm sure we're going to at some point. Um, Even the idea of like saving everything to the cloud, even that, like that concept of it being the cloud. I mean, that has such, kind of like heavenly cherub, connotations and everything. So much of I even feel like a lot of the language being used is akin to, religious language for, a lot of the tech that we use. I mean, really, Signal and Telegram have, taken the place of the confessional, in my opinion. So, because people think it's, somehow safe. Um, it's an interesting idea that I definitely want to explore more on. I love the idea. I love what you're saying about that. Maybe this isn't all, where did the problems kind of stem from? Was it capitalism? Was it this, or was it just this, this technological, upward march, um, that has us where we are today? Um, yeah, I want
Well,
I want to get into it. Go ahead.
well, so you've read the piece from Crossbows to Cryptography, I assume.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. So in there, it makes the argument that sort of technology evens the playing field of the citizen against the state, people who would exert power over us. So it
Yep.
starts off with like, okay, outlaws were able to use crossbows. because the king had a professional military,
Hmm.
and the subjects were just regular folks picking up arms against this professional military, but the crossbows leveled the playing field.
Right.
So if you stopped the example right there, it would seem that technology benefited the average citizen. But what they're leaving out in that example is eventually the king and the professional army all got crossbows too. So now their ability to execute violence against you has just exponentially grown. You see
Right.
what I'm saying? So
Right.
it's an arms race that is eventually going to serve domination structures. It has to. So you go, and I think we've even talked about this once before on maybe an Into the Void, but go back to the printing press and Martin Luther. Wow, isn't it great that now all these people have access to literature and can learn to read and inform themselves and all these sorts of things. And yes, it's a great leap forward for the average person. But how long before that did the king start using it for propaganda?
Right.
So you go to cryptography or crypto even, and like how much of these are honeypots or being used for clandestine operations or intelligence and all sorts of things. There's an example I use to show how like just even infrastructure benefits big business. It's like we all pay taxes, like wheel tax for the roads, right? But
Hmm.
you and I, we drive back and forth to wherever locally, a couple
Yep.
times a day or whatever. But like a company like UPS, they're really getting their money's worth out of that wheel tax because
Yeah.
they're on the road. No, I mean, 11 hours a day, just go, 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 go. And they're wearing down the roads, but they're really not paying that much more than we are for
Right.
that same wheel tax. So it's the same thing with any technology is like the people that are willing to use it for professionally for violence or to control people, they're doing that shit full time. So like take like smartphones or computers. It used to be that like if you wanted to infiltrate, let's say, a movement, you needed whole teams. Like the FBI needed whole teams and handlers and informants, and they needed to pay a bunch of
Yep.
people and all this sort of. Now, I mean, one guy and 12 phones can infiltrate movements all. You know what I mean? It takes way less
Yep.
resources for them to do. Now, it takes way less resources for us to do certain things as well, and that's great. But we're not the one. We're not out there trying to dominate others, and they are. So it
Yep.
eventually these all of these technologies are eventually going to serve the state and other power structures.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I like where you're going with that. And actually your example of Martin Luther is a great one because, so many Protestants look at Martin Luther as, oh, he opened everything up, he set everything free. No, Martin Luther didn't do anything on his own. He had the support of varying territories and, the people who were in control of those territories, and they wanted to cede power away from the Catholic Church. So of course they supported him. You think it's about like, oh, democratizing God. Oh, by no means. It was about taking power, it was the powerful trying to take power away from other powerful people, in this case, the Catholic Church. So the idea that, say this, it seems like this technological march is empowering the individual, who's actually supporting that? And usually you'll find that it's, the military VCs and whatever else. And, what are their actual aims with a lot of this stuff? And like you said, they're getting a lot more mileage out of what we're doing or, out of the technology that gets used every day. So where is the grand benefit, overall? And I think it's a fair critique to make, even just from a, like we were talking about earlier about building your own, kind of building your own world. I mean, we can debate the validity perhaps of some of these statistics and some of this research for sure, but I think the idea that people are more depressed today and more people are more depressed than they have ever been, um, I don't think that's unfair to say, and it's an irony since we're more interconnected than we've ever been. Like there's no reason people should feel alone. There's no reason, for any of this, that I would argue kind of stems at this depression. But it's there. And so, if we're not actually happier with it, what's going on? Like why is that upward march still happening? And it's because it's not really about empowering you, the individual, in this sense of technology that we're talking about. Um,
Yes, I mean, several things on that, and
sure.
I'm not necessarily saying anything that hasn't already been said, but
Right.
so, yeah, people are less happy than they've ever been, and, it's okay, so it's easy to point on everybody's on their fucking phones, and everybody's
Hmm.
looking at Instagram all the time and seeing other people's lives, and they're not feeling fulfilled because that's sort of just an an a dead end, an empty, venture, there's nothing
Right.
there, you're not really getting filled, but, it's also just our system as a whole sort of, like, crushes people's hopes and dreams, and there's there's a Doug Stanhope quote where he's like, "Yeah, your guidance told teacher taught you to, go sit your life for 40 years under fluorescent tubes and waste your life away, and nobody ever asked you, like, what makes you happy," you know what I mean? And
Right.
so some of this is, like, society, like, things are getting worse sort of materially and in terms of community, and, so there's something to that as well. It's not just everything's technological. But honestly, you say we're all more interconnected than ever before, but fucking are we? So like,
Mm.
how much does this, being connected to people all over the world through your fucking fondle slab, how much does that actually just degrade real connection in your own life? And how much can we even like handle being connected to tens of thousands of people?
Oh, we
I don't
can't.
I don't know
Yeah.
that yeah, I don't know that our brains can even like manage that. There's the Dunbar's number that everybody brings up, and I think
Yep.
there's fucking truth to that. Like, you can only really
100%.
form real connection with, like, a handful of people, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so, like, how much is being connected or thinking you're connected to 10,000 people, how much is this degrading, like, real connection in your own fucking life? And how much is that depressing everyone?
Yeah.
Like, I
Right.
think there's something to that. And so, like, there is real benefits to having every all the information in the world in the palm of my hand, and being able to get a lot of things on demand, and there's real benefits to this technology, but on the net, is this causing more harm than good? And I'm
Hmm.
the more time goes on, the more I think it's actually a net negative on us as humans, for a lot of different reasons. So, but I'm not sure. I guess in the end we'll see, but I don't know how to. It depends on what metric you're measuring on. It's like,
Right.
yes, we're more affluent, but we're more empty and dead inside than we ever have been. You know what I mean? So, at
Yeah.
what cost? Do you know?
Yeah, no, I think you raise an excellent point. Something that when people say, and this has been going on for ever since the smartphone has existed, when people say, "Oh, everybody's just like stuck in their phones," and then somebody pulls out a meme where it's like people sitting in a train car and they're all holding up newspapers and not looking at each other and not talking to each other. Now, it's a funny thing. Like it seems like a nice uh, parry at this whole idea that it's like, oh, you think smartphones change things? No, it didn't. People have always ignored each other. But the fundamental misunderstanding of that retort in the meme is that the newspaper you were reading 9 times out of 10 was a local newspaper talking about local news about things that you knew that you could envision. Like if you're living in upstate New York, you knew what Genesee Street was, you knew what all these places were. And so even if you weren't talking to other people and your face was stuck in a newspaper, you were still learning about things that were around you that you had direct influence over, not, being hyper connected with people thousands of miles away like the smartphone has. So to say that somehow people, shoving their faces in a newspaper equates to shoving their face in a smartphone all day long isn't accurate at all. Like, I mean, it's not like apples and oranges doesn't begin to describe the discrepancy between the two. Um, so yeah, I hear you that by its very nature, the smartphone is taking you mentally and through its data transmission, taking you to thousands of miles away for hours and hours of the day, as compared to, you getting information that has a more direct and local effect upon you, perhaps. So it's an interesting idea that you're bringing up there, Sek. I like that.
Yeah, I'll tell you one of the worst things for my mental well-being
Hmm.
was being very aware of a bunch of horrible things that were happening around the world because my
Right.
parents were like political radicals. So they were very aware of every war that was going on and every
Yep.
starvation campaign and every famine and every whatever the thing. And being very aware of all of that at a very young age did not do well for my mental well-being.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like, being aware of every bad thing that's happening all over the and I'm not saying you shouldn't be aware of these things, and
Sure.
I'm not saying you shouldn't empathize with these people, but being inundated with, like, every bad thing that's happening around the world all the time, man, it's absolutely terrible for your psyche. You know, you listen to people, like, online and, like, "Oh, the world's on fire and everything's going to shit, and we're never more divided than everything and anything that ever, that we ever were," and all this sorts of thing, and I just, like I look outside, birds are chirping, you know what I mean? Like, I go down the street, everybody's being really nice to each other, we're just going about our day, like, everything's fucking fine. There's lots of problems and there's lots of horrors in the world, and all of these things are terrible, and I want all of them to stop, and I feel for the people that are fucking losing children to drone bombs, I feel that in my heart, but
Hmm.
on a day-to-day basis, my life is okay, and
Right.
I think the more you focus on things that are far away in your phone and all over the world, and the less you focus on the things in your own life that you may have some appreciation for and might find you some fucking happiness, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
No, it's
go
a
ahead.
great point. It's a great point you're bringing up, and it brings up kind of an odd paradox. I've always felt that government or the state is the ultimate in not minding one's business. You know, like it's the ultimate nosy neighbor. It's and the most lethal one as well. Um, and I love what you're saying because you
It's
know,
the most violent lawn Nazi.
yeah, right. Most violent lawn Nazi. All right, that's got to be a T-shirt somewhere. That's fantastic. Yeah, exactly. So, but here's the thing: is I think so many people, especially today, like now, they're literally voting harder. I don't know how you do that, but you can just feel it. Like these people, we are voting harder. And they're doing so because I think they feel absolutely helpless in the face of all of this stuff, all this terrible stuff that's happening around them, and they feel like they have no agency, they have no control about it. Their heart's breaking, rightfully so, over some of these situations, and they feel like they can't do anything about it, so they have to have a body. There has to be something above them that will handle it. That has the wherewithal, the amount, the amount of power, to handle it, even though it really can't. And again, as we all know, the state actually creates more problems than it solves, if it even solves any. But what we're forgetting is that maybe what happened in, a Broken Bow, Oklahoma, is not our business. It's really not any of our business. What happened and I can say this, because I thought, when I joined the military and I went over to Afghanistan, I thought I was going there to help people. I learned very quickly that I was not. That I wasn't helping anybody. And so, in a very real way, what's happening over there, and people can disagree with me on this if they want, but in a very real way, that was none of my business. Um, but I went over there and tried to make it my business, and I think it ended up with disastrous results, which we can all see when the U.S. pulled out of there, and for many many other reasons. So yeah, I really like what you're getting at here because again, like this turns us all into nosy neighbors, and we're we're thousands of miles away and we think we need to do something, and so we believe in some kind of again government body that maybe could solve it or whatever, but actually it's just going to make the problem worse. And
Yeah, did you
go ahead.
hear that there's a story that there so there's some place I think it was someplace in Africa, and some charity sent over, like, rounded up a bunch of money to
Mm,
send over a bunch of stuff, like, pencils, paper, and they sent over a bunch of shoes, And I think this was not just a charity; it was like an NGO.
Right.
And so they sent over a bunch of shoes and like, look, listen, I like to help people in need. I
Sure.
really do. I enjoy doing this. And but in sending over a bunch of shoes, you think that's a great thing, right? But what they did is they put like a bunch of people in Africa that made shoes out of fucking business
Right.
immediately. So now there's like whole families and a whole industry that's just out of business, and now their families don't have any way of making money, and now they're having trouble. Like they lose their house, they don't, they can't, they're having trouble affording food, or they have to go into some other industry or work for somebody else or whatever the thing. And so like just fucking around that way, like people have help people that need help or whatever, but in some sense like people also have to like figure this shit out themselves.
But yeah, just sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, even if you have the best of intentions, it usually has like unforeseen consequences. I guess was my point.
Sure. The road to hell, paved in good
Yeah,
intentions.
exactly right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, well, there's a lot to mull over here, and I want to continue this conversation because I think we need to dive into, where I think where technology fits into, more accurately fits into the paradigm that is the state. Not so much that technology is part of the government, but that it exists concurrently with it in a way, and overall makes, is part of what makes the state. And I guess the question that we'll want to answer at that point when we do another real-time sovereign is, can you have this level of technology and not have the state? Or does one promote the other? Can one exist without the other? Does one promote the other? What does that paradigm look like? Um, so yeah, Sek, I got to say, I love having you on. We've had epic conversations over the years on your own show, the Agora podcast, which everybody should go and listen to right now, and also on our sub series of Into the Void. But Sek, where do you want people to look you up?
I mean, you can find me. I'm on Telegram and Twitter at Sek McGora, and also on Discord at that same name. You can find me if you like. And I would say that in conclusion, the computer revolution and its consequences have been just disastrous for the human race, to paraphrase Uncle Ted. But yeah, man, this was fun, and it's always a blast talking to you. And we could do another couple of hours on this subject. But I'm happy to do a part two on it, and I think everybody else would really enjoy that as well.
Yeah, 100%. And okay, so yeah, we're gonna expand on that statement you just made next time, and we're gonna go over all of it. I can't wait. So, all right, brother. Well, I appreciate you being on, and yeah, always a great time, to communicate. And I'm sure we're going to be doing more Into the Voids in the future, and so people can look out for that. But for now, we will see all of you, on the other side.